All right, well, thank you everybody for taking some time out of your day to come and hang out with me and our company, Surgere. My name is Michael Schwab. We'll be talking about a topic today that I think a lot of us have heard about for the last number of years, but going to try to do it in a little bit of a way that's not maybe as promotional. I don't feel like we need to tell everybody who Surgere is other than this one slide, because if I came and did this without a slide like this, our CEO would ask me what I was doing here. So Surgere is a software company. We integrate IoT technologies so that you have supply chain visibility from end to end. Rest of that stuff, if you want it, I'll send it to you afterwards. But I want to talk about a problem that, especially since we're all here in the reusable packaging pavilion, we see a lot, and I think is something that's a pretty common problem, but that there are easy solutions to. So as you look behind us and as you walk the green aisles here in the pavilion, we see a lot of companies that make packaging, reusable packaging. Those would be pallets, containers, anything that may qualify as dunnage, and you're reusing it over and over and over again. And that's great because you've decided to make an investment in something that means you're not using single use or corrugate with hopefully minimal usage of those materials, but you've invested in what could be potentially hundreds of dollars per container, depending on the complexity, and then you put it out into your supply chain and it gets lost. So from a problem perspective, we spend a lot of money and then we don't know what happens to it. And if we don't know what happens to it, now we don't have the ability to actually improve our supply chain operations. Maybe it ends up with another supplier or another customer, and we have a gap in that knowledge. So how do we solve this problem? So today what I'm going to take you through is just a couple education points, talk about some of the application of IoT technologies in tracking your packaging and your reusables. And then, like any good substitute teacher, I'm going to play a video and distract you from anything you didn't like that I said. So a little bit of the education side. What is IoT? Internet of Things. So if you're not familiar with that acronym, you probably have IoT devices in your home or on your person if you have a smartwatch, if you have a modern smartphone, if you have a microwave or a refrigerator at home that's connected to your internet, or you use Google or Alexa, you have IoT devices. Well, those IoT devices exist residential and also at a commercial scale. So any device that can talk to the internet or share information back to the internet or a network is now connected. It's part of the Internet of Things. In supply chain, like we're saying, these are commercial level or industrial level devices that allow you to use them for a much longer period of time if they have a battery. So a good equivalent is if you use like an Apple AirTag or a tile tracker. Well, we've got industrial versions of those. But anything you see along this slide is technically an IoT device. And we deploy these to work and track assets through your supply chain. So it could be the container, it could be the parts inside your container, but as it moves from spot to spot, how are you understanding what's happening to those pieces of information, what the status is, what the environment is that they're in, so that you can make better operational decisions within your company or talk with your packaging suppliers about finding the right packaging so that what you're doing through your supply chain activities can be optimized. So because we've got all these different potential types of devices, and IoT is this massive topic that we're not going to cover today in a 20-minute talk, I want to leave you with a few things to think about as you're choosing IoT technology. So you may or may not be familiar with RFID, GPS, Bluetooth, ultra-wideband. I'm not going to try to educate you on pros and cons and what you may or may not want to do with each of those, but you can use each of these technologies in different ways to track your assets, track your containers as they move through your supply chain or from point A to point B, even within your manufacturing or operational facilities. We think about these in different ways so that we can ultimately recommend and have suggestions around why you may choose RFID versus GPS or Bluetooth. Where are you actually running your operations? So when you're purchasing your packaging or your containers, you need to talk with your suppliers for those materials about, this is where I'm doing my business, right? If it's inside, if it's in a perfectly, hermetically sealed, no moisture, no humidity, no acids or things that could degrade those containers over time, Well, that's a different environment than if you're in a manufacturing or automotive, or you're in an agricultural field where you're exposed to indoor and outdoor elements, where you're exposed to different things within your environment. You have different people handling your packages and your containers and your assets on a regular basis. So if it's inside or outside, that may drastically change what you're actually looking to track and how we can track it. Is it plastic? Is it metal? Those are obviously two very common types of reusable types of packaging, but there are many other different substrates that are now being introduced, and as you walk the halls, you'll see some of those innovations. Well, if it's plastic, we can transmit a signal very easily through that kind of material, but if it's metal, we need to have different considerations. Think about how do we best get the signal from RFID, GPS, Bluetooth, ultra-wideband into those packages so that the package material itself or the manufacturing environment itself does not interfere with those radio signals. How often do you want data? Some of these technologies are what we call passive. They don't have a battery source, so they can only be scanned to understand what's happening with them. But some of them are active. They have a battery source. So how often you want information about the assets or the containers or the pallets within your supply chain will have a great influence on what type of technologies you'll choose. And then how are you going to integrate your data? Some people will just say, oh, I've got this, and I've got a software supplier or a software producer that will show me all the data I need. Some companies want to see this data integrated to the rest of their enterprise systems. It needs to be easy for you to access so that you can adopt this kind of technology. If you come in and you say, well, I've got this proprietary system, you can only use this data one way, and it can only be with this type of material or this type of container, you're really limiting the potential scale and scope of that overall supply chain visibility that you might be looking to have. So we're going to talk about IoT and packaging and supply chain with three things. And these are really meant to arm you when you're having conversations with the Orbises of the world who are right behind us, so they're going to get a lot of maybe potential name references from me. There's pitfalls to this. You know, it's not seamless. We make these kinds of technologies and we integrate these kind of technologies. We'll be the first ones to tell you this is not seamless. There are pitfalls you have to be aware of, or these kinds of tracking and traceability programs will just fail. There are advantages to it. Certainly, you're going to get a lot of data and a lot of insights that you didn't have before, and how do you take advantage of that so that it's beneficial to your organization and you can make better decisions. And then ultimately making it work. So let's think about some of the pitfalls first. Biggest pitfall we see, and that I will tell you with any operational program like this that you're going to deploy in mass scale, is governance. If you just say, I'm going to buy a bunch of RFID tags and slap it onto things, your system will fail. It will not work simply because you don't have governance. That could be, well, the president really likes RFID or they really like Bluetooth, so that's what we're using. Well, that's great, but the hourly workers or the staff that are actually using that technology and have to make it work don't understand why. Many examples of where governance has shot programs like these in the foot. You're adopting a new technology, but then you're also expecting the people that are executing that work to be able to run it seamlessly. Improper use or installation. Easy example, if you buy a plastic container and you put a single RFID tag on it and you run it through an RFID scanner, it may not be read. RFID is not a perfect technology. None of these are perfect technologies. They all have their advantages and pros and cons, and so we need to think about how are you tracking what you're looking to track, those assets, what's your environment, some of those things we were talking about a little bit earlier, so that you know how many tags to put on a device, how many readers you may need in your facility. And then ultimately, you do this, you've got a governance plan, you've gotten all the operational pieces in place. Well, now you're going to get a ton of data. Some of that data is really, really good, and you want to use that to make decisions with. Some of that data will be superfluous, it won't matter. So how do we look at the right data? How do we discriminate the data that you need so that you can make better decisions? And that's supply chain decisions that can extend all the way into operational decisions with your finance team or with your sales team or with other teams in your organization. You've got data that's verifiable and auditable now. You want to give that data to other groups in your organization so they understand what's happening and why. But there are advantages. The advantage, of course, you're going to have an investment upfront capital cost to purchase plastic pallets, purchase metal totes or metal containers or plastic totes and containers. But now you start to save money in the long run. So it's that common investment that a lot of us face within a business sense of we need to make a capital investment that's going to potentially be very, very high, but we're going to amortize that, or we're going to recognize that cost savings over many, many years in the future. Of course, when you start to buy these containers and pallets, they work for so many cycles or for so many years, depending on what they're made out of. So over time, you start to save money. Well, how do you save money? Good example, RFID tag. Depending on the volume of RFID tags you buy and depending on what you need that tag to do, can be as few as 5 or 10 cents up to 25 or 35 cents. So you're not investing significantly more than what you've already spent on your containers and your packaging to now have trackability and traceability of answering the question, where's my stuff? Easy example, because we like to talk about things in very big numbers and big savings. We have a client that has 11 million containers in their supply chain. And even if we look at a very small segment of potential savings for them, we've been able to help them recognize $18.7 million in savings. Well, where does that come from? You buy containers that are proper for your supply chain, so you don't need to rebuy them over time. This technology helps you understand how many containers you actually need. So you may think, oh, I needed to start with 5 million, but then you realize over time for stock and flow purposes, or for first in, first out kind of purposes, maybe you need more. And so they ultimately have 11 million containers in their supply chain. That reduces corrugate and single-use packaging. If you choose the right IoT technology, now you have something that you put on once, and you may never have to actually have maintenance on over time. So now you're saving labor and time and investment, those kind of things. So that 18.7 million certainly isn't just from a packaging number, but that takes into account the things that you save that are oftentimes benefits of just having reusable containers or repurposable containers. And now you look at adding in that IoT technology and adding in labor savings and visibility that help you run smarter. So now you start to save, in this case, 18.7 million a year. Talked about this a little bit. You also reduce single-use waste. So in a lot of manufacturing environments or supply chain environments, we all hate exceptions, right? It means I have to ship something quicker or faster or in a way that I wasn't expecting to. Well, now I'm probably turning to a single-use kind of a scenario. So another client that we have looked at this same kind of challenge, and they didn't go at it from, maybe want cost savings like the previous example. They do want cost savings because all of us want to save money at this point. But they looked at it from how can we better impact the environment and get back to some of the common core of why would you use anything that's reusable, a water bottle, a packaging container. Why would you choose certain things in your lifestyle or for your company that are reusable? This company's goal, and they're on the way to achieving it, is by 2030, they're looking to save and reduce 145 million pounds of one-time or single-use packaging. That's huge from an environmental impact. So if your company has sustainability goals, now you can impact that in different ways through your supply chain. All of this is a mix of the container choice, right, and a layer of IoT, because we buy hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars of these containers. Now we need that way to track them and understand where they are, what's happening with them, did they get misplaced, how do I get it back so I don't have to buy it again? And some of these numbers come from a result of that integration of the packaging type and the IoT integration of the technology. So how do you make it work? I wanted to try to keep this more picture-based and less words, but this probably has the most words of any slide. It really has to work from the time that you're thinking about integrating reusable packaging into your supply chain. So if you haven't done that yet, and you've got a bunch of reusable containers or assets, it's not like you're down the creek, you have no lifeline, you can't get backwards to do it. You can always integrate these things retroactively. But when you're talking with the companies that are here, or if you are one of the companies that are here exhibiting, and the customer side of it, these are things that you should be talking to each other about. Because if you talk about these things, now you can plan from the inception of that reusable program, or you're buying new containers, or you want to retrofit existing containers. If you're part of a manufacturing program, we deal a lot with automotives and manufacturers. We know that their suppliers are not just suppliers oftentimes to one OEM or one manufacturer, they supply many manufacturers. So if that container is purchased at a tier 1 supplier, and then it ends up with an OEM that was unexpected, how do I get that back? Well, if you have that data, and you have that data across the entire network, now you can go find it so you don't have to re-spend that investment and find those dollars again. You're investing in it, how are you tracking it? I mentioned it a little earlier. This technology starts as small as 5 or 7 cents per piece if you're talking about RFID. If you go up to Bluetooth or GPS, it can get much more expensive, sometimes in the hundreds of dollars per piece. But if you're tracking something that's really high value and that's critical and you need to know where it is every single second of the day, that investment in that higher level of technology may be great. Are you investing enough to eliminate your corrugate? These are kinds of questions that we don't see answered until after the program's been in place for a little while. But you think, oh, well, I know this is my shipment inbound and outbound every day, this many pieces, this many containers. So let me just go buy that number of containers and reusables, I'm all set. Well, with all of the supply chain challenges that we've all seen and hopefully not had impact of too much in the last few years, what we don't know is, well, if I could increase my volume inbound or increase my volume outbound, what would that mean to my bottom line? How much more could I sell? How much more could I move on to the next step in the supply chain that I may not be thinking of? Well, until you understand your cycles and turn and dwell time with some of these IoT technologies, can't answer those questions very easily. But they're things that you can be talking about with your packaging supplier and then within your customer base and your supplier base so that you can optimize those decisions and have real data to make it work. So I said, like any good substitute teacher, you just get through part of the lesson and then you show a video and hopefully the class isn't glazed over by too much at this time. But we put a short video together that shows how a few different technologies can begin to work together to give you that visibility into your supply chain. So I'm gonna play it, I'll talk over it a little bit as it's going. But we talk about a lot of different IoT technologies and how they work. Well, those are individual examples that I kind of gave throughout the last 10 or 15 minutes here. But what about if you could combine those technologies? So in a common warehouse application, you might think about passive RFID. It's a great, low cost, easy to invest in IoT technology. We have higher cost technologies like ultra wideband that give you really precise, exact tracking. You can integrate these things like we talked about with your enterprise systems and solutions. So now we're bringing together multiple IoT technologies, other enterprise systems so you get the data how you want and when you want. I will tell you from a solution perspective, this isn't necessarily like, mind-blowing kind of a thing in terms of providers who are like us, but it's thinking about what is your manufacturing environment or your production environment, what are your supply chain constraints, and what are the right technologies or singular technology to help you solve some of those visibility challenges. So with an RFID and ultra wideband type of tracking, we can understand what's happening, where it's at, and then who's actually moving those things from point A to point B so that you understand every single data point that you want within your supply chain. That enables you to have more internal intelligence, but then as you're planning for how many containers or pallets do I need, now I know where am I short, where did my manpower not have enough to get done what they wanted to that day, and go and rectify that with your packaging suppliers. So just a couple key points to kind of wrap it up and leave you with. If you're thinking about reusables and returnables, or you already have them, that's great, right? You've obviously made an investment to do that. You're reducing a lot of the cardboard or single-use waste, which is a great environmental impact as well. But how do you protect it and monitor it? If you just buy it and then it ends up somewhere else that you can't find, now you've lost that investment, which is a higher dollar amount than the single-use container investment. IoT can unlock this key data that you need to make some of these decisions, but you have to pick the right ones. It's truly not as simple as saying, let me go buy a roll of RFID tags from any of these manufacturers and slap them on, right? Maybe RFID is great, maybe it's not. Picking the right ones can have a big impact on the kind of data that you get and what you can do with that data so that you make better operational decisions. Technology isn't a magic bullet, right? We can't all just go buy the next iPhone and it solves our world problems. We have to have a plan and governance to ensure its success. And as you think about loss reduction and sustainability goals that your company may have, let's talk about those and make sure that you're aligned with your supply chain folks so that you understand how you can integrate IoT at a successful level.